Have you ever dated or been in a relationship with a fearful avoidant attachment style and wondered what they felt when the relationship finally ended and they actually realized that they lost you? If this is something that you're curious about and you want to understand the fearful avoidance inside world and relationship to loss after a relationship is done once and for all, stay tuned and we're going to cover all of the components of what exactly happens when the fearful avoidant realizes they lost you in this video. So, first and foremost, one of the things you want to recognize about fearful avoidant attachment styles is that it takes them a little while to process their own emotions. The reason being that fearful avoidant attachment styles tend to cope by not only minimizing their attachment needs to others when they're in pain in their relationships, but they also tend to cope by trying to kind of numb out or disconnect from their own emotions. However, fearful avoidants tend to really feel their emotions eventually. They tend to do a very good job of sort of numbing and repressing and distracting for a short period of time. And then eventually they inevitably feel that emotion bubbling up that was all sort of being buried or pushed down beneath the surface. And this is one of the many ways that fearful avoidant attachment styles often cope. One of the big reasons for this is often that fearful avoidant attachment styles were exposed to in childhood or earlier life events really kind of chaotic circumstances where they had to survive and really just adapt to their environment by pushing down their emotions, disconnecting from themselves to a certain degree to try to cope with what was in front of them in their environment. And then they really felt about those things later. So, a really clear example of this could be that a fearful avoidant grew up in a home, for example, with a parent who was an alcoholic. And, in those circumstances where they may have come home and saw their parent passed out on the floor, they didn't really have time or space to feel their own emotions. They really had to instead kind of disconnect from what they were feeling, go into sort of survival mode, try to see if the parent was okay, maybe help get the parent into bed, get the parent some food. And then after they really had that space, that they sort of had this boomerang effect on when they would feel their emotions and actually process. And so this same subconscious set of patterns for how to deal with difficult events often is what the subconscious mind knows and what it will revert back into in the case of some kind of unstable or challenging circumstance, including when there's a breakup. So when we really extrapolate from that and we dig that into a fearful avoidant realizing that somebody has been, sort of moved on in a relationship dynamic, oftentimes fearful avoidance will sort of be disconnected from that example at first. So they may think, oh, I didn't really lose the person. Maybe things will work out in the future. And they may sort of be not in denial, but just in repression, which can sort of mirror the way it looks in terms of denial, right? So you might sort of see a fearful avoidant say, oh, maybe the person will come back around, maybe we'll work things out later if it's meant to be, maybe things will happen in the future. But eventually, if they see that person move on, or if they see that person date somebody new, or stop responding to their texts or messages, they may actually then come to understand, okay, I really did lose this person. There's probably no chance of a future with this person. And this can often make them then swing into their anxious side. So what we'll see in this case is a fearful avoidant attachment style may really go into that sort of fear of abandonment place, that feeling of being alone, and being saddened and feeling disconnected from the person that they were in a relationship with. And they will stay there for a little bit, and they may even not only experience regret, but often, sort of fantasize about the potential of reaching back out to that person. So they may even send a message to kind of feel out where that person's really at, try to look for confirmation. Did this person really truly move on? Now, fearful avoidants don't really love to be vulnerable, especially once they've been hurt in a relationship. And even if fearful avoidants were the ones breaking up the relationship, they still tend to store that relationship with a good bit of hurt, because often they'll break up because there were a series of events that led up to the breakup where they didn't feel like they were being seen or heard, or they didn't feel like their needs were being met. And so they'll store that with like a lot of hurt and sometimes even feelings of rejection. So they'll swing into their anxious side when they realize, okay, this person really is moving on, or maybe I have lost them. And they may sort of reach out indirectly, but they usually don't feel strong enough, I would say. It's not even strong because it's not the representation of a fearful avoidant not being strong. Fearful avoidants tend to be very strong people, but they don't want to expose themselves to the risk of vulnerability and rejection. And so they won't feel determined enough necessarily to really reach out and say, this is what I'm feeling. I miss you. Are you really, moving on? Should we try this again? Like they won't be that direct. They'll tend to reach out in a very indirect way. So maybe they'll sort of be like, "Hey, how are things? How's your dating life going?" Trying to sort of like drudge up information slowly but surely. And so this will be them being in their anxious side. And then what we'll often see is if they don't get the type of response they're looking for, then a fearful avoidant will cope soon after that, maybe a few days later, a few hours later, maybe even a couple weeks later, by if they don't see a positive response from their ex, they may swing into that more avoidant side because fearful avoidants do absolutely have this capacity to try to minimize and deny their own attachment needs to somebody else as a means of protecting themselves and keeping themselves safe. In other words, if they can convince themselves that they don't need you or it wasn't going to work anyways or it's fine that you moved on, then that's a sort of this armor of self-protection that they put on. It's a way that they use to protect themselves. And they may go back into this kind of numbing state for a while and really disconnecting from their emotions again. And eventually they may do things to try to push themselves into moving on. But generally, we will see first this period of somewhere between a couple weeks, maybe 2 weeks up to 4 weeks or so, where once the fearful avoidant realizes they lost somebody, they may experience that regret. They may be in that anxious side. They may feel a sense of rejection and loss, and they may even reach out sort of indirectly to try to feel out the circumstance. Now, if this is you, as a fearful avoidant and you recognize some of this in your patterns, one of the first things you want to do is really dig into, well, why do I disconnect from my emotions so much? And how can I get better in touch with my emotions and process them more efficiently and effectively, right? How can I dig into myself a little bit better and try to really see what's going on there for me beneath the surface and actually process out that underlying content? Because if you can get into a position where, part of what you're mourning or grieving after a breakup is the needs that your ex was meeting, and then you can come up with ways to meet these needs in the relationship to yourself or communicate these needs in healthy ways to friends and family members in your life. Well, now you're going to start seeing yourself build a lot more momentum. And if you can also realize, sometimes breakups hurt because we tell ourselves all these painful stories. We say, I wasn't good enough, or the person never loved me if they broke up with me to begin with, or the person, if they loved me enough, would have met my needs and they didn't, so they must not have cared. If we tell these really one-sided stories without really challenging and questioning our perspectives around these things, we can get stuck there and it can be very painful and it can make it much more difficult to actually process our emotions and what we're feeling. So it's going to be of the utmost importance to really dig into that underlying content, to really question some of those things and to come up with healthy strategies for how to meet your needs. And if you're on the receiving end of a breakup with a fearful avoidant and you're watching this, your process and your path is going to be the same. It's going to be, well, what needs did the fearful avoidant meet? And usually those were needs to feel really seen, important, the needs to feel heard and understood and empathized with, sometimes needs for novelty, excitement. Like you want to make a list of what this person brought into your life. And part of the void that we're really grieving when we go through a breakup is we're grieving the attachment we made to this person meeting those needs. And so we get better and better at learning to meet those needs and create healthy strategies in the relationship to ourselves. You'll actually see that that big pit of grief becomes smaller and smaller more quickly. Or, in other words, you can take some of that really strong initial sting out of the breakup. Now, if you want to do a much deeper dive into this idea, into healing from a breakup, processing stuff, we have a course called How to Heal from a Breakup. It includes those two key pieces as well as two other major steps to heal from a breakup really quickly. And you can use the link below for a 7-day free trial, and that will give you access to all of that content for 7 days for free, along with all of their courses at PDS. And really, that if you're coming out of a situationship, a friendship breakup, going no contact with a family member, or even just like a typical dating relationship breakup, it will take 30 to 40% of that sting out of the breakup experience fast. Like it won't help heal the entire thing immediately, but as you go through those exercises, and the course is only like an hour and a half long or so, as you go through those exercises, you will see, okay, this really helps me to process out some of the emotion and grief very quickly using 4 major steps we have in there. And then after that, you'll also have this clear path forward of what to do next to kind of heal that rest of the pain points that are there. as you sort of detach from an ex. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope this shed some light on different things. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments down below. Or if you want to share a little bit about what you're going through after a breakup with a fearful avoidant and what that experience is like for you, I can definitely create more videos about that. But thank you so much for watching and for being here. And if you're enjoying this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And I can't wait to see you in future videos.